Okay, welcome to this special frequently asked questions session. Now, we did have a big launch the other week and we had two fantastic guests on that launch. We had Jamie Kilner and Tom Campbell from the Greenwood Academies Trust, and they were brilliant in answering lots of questions, but we got so many questions in that we've put this special edition together. So I'm very pleased to say in the virtual studio again with me today are Tom Campbell, Chief Education Officer for the Greenwood Academies Trust, and Jamie Kilner, the Senior Advisor for Vocational Curriculum for the Greenwood Academies Trust. Good morning, good afternoon, gentlemen. How are we doing?
Good afternoon.
Well, thanks, Toby.
Good, I'll get the right time of day as well. Right, okay, so yeah, lots and lots of questions came in. Really good in-depth questions from lots and lots of centres. We had 743 people watching our last show, so you can imagine how many questions came in. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for taking the time to answer these questions. So let's go through them. One of the ones that came in was, I'm interested in how you find starting in year 9. Do you go straight into the spec content, or do you ease the students in with the basics? Who wants to take that question?
I'm quite happy to start with that, if you don't mind, Toby. I mean, we get asked this question quite a lot, mainly because of this controversy around 3-year Key Stage 3 versus a 3-year Key Stage 4. And our view is that the answer to the question is different depending on the curriculum design in the individual academy. We believe that a traditional Key Stage 3 curriculum hasn't necessarily fully equipped pupils with the skills to then follow a vocational pathway in Key Stage 4. And therefore, if curriculum planning is done long term and you're looking at that experience of children all the way through the key stages, then you would have elements of the Key Stage 3 curriculum that do prepare pupils for the sorts of learning skills they might encounter in a vocational qualification at Key Stage 4, as opposed to a traditional GCSE. So in terms of what we've done at the Trust is we've made sure that our Key Stage 3 curriculum prepares pupils for all pathways, keep options open for as long as possible. So children in Key Stage 3 have project-based learning. They are used to peer review, different types of feedback that are diagnostic. They're used to relating their learning to the real world and to the world of work. So because the Trust career strategy has been embraced across our academies, we believe that Key Stage 3 does in some way prepare pupils for a Key Stage 4 that involves a vocational learning. So some of those academies do begin to get involved in vocational subjects in year 9, and Jamie might be able to talk a few examples around sport, for example. However, if the Key Stage 3 curriculum is more traditional, then perhaps year 9 is a good opportunity to fill some of those gaps as a transition towards year 10 and the entry into the specification and the option. Would you agree, Jamie?
Yeah, so I think just to add to Tom's point there, Toby, one of the things we look at in year 9 is to look at the qualification in its entirety and then pick out some of the key aspects of the qualifications which we feel will be relevant to the students in year 9, but will also provide them with a real experience of what that qualification will look like in years 10 and 11. So if we, just to allude to what Tom said about the sport qualification, we would look at something like principles of fitness testing and training within year 9, and some areas. So we can look at students and then we can discuss with them, do you like this qualification? Is this the right qualification for you? Those are the sort of the key areas really moving forward into that year 10 and 11 delivery plan.
Okay, so summing up from your point of view, it really does add to that student's ability, giving them that grounding in year 9 so that they can make better options. They're also going into year 10 with more basic knowledge, in other words, to be able to do better with that. And does that happen more? You said that you tend to do that with more vocational students than GCSE students, is that right?
I think we do it with all pupils. As I say, we discussed previously, we were asked a question about the prior attainment profile of pupils and whether we had this division of high priority pupils following a GCSE pathway and others following a vocational. And we explained that there's much more diversity within the pupil population in terms of those that choose the vocational option of a business studies as opposed to a GCSE, or the vocational approach to sport as opposed to the GCSE. So I think it's just about long-term curriculum planning. You can't expect a child that's followed a pathway that has traditionally prepared them for a GCSE experience and then expect them to suddenly be able to cope in the environment of particularly one of the Cambridge national courses. There needs to be an acknowledgement from the school that any one of these pupils may wish to follow that pathway, and therefore we need to consider how we could prepare pupils for all of those options. And then they're suitably prepared, they've had the exposure to the different types of learning, and then any choice that is made is an informed choice. And it's more likely the pupils will succeed on that pathway, as opposed to suddenly importing a set of vocational qualifications that were never ever on the agenda when that child started, particularly at the beginning of Key Stage 3. That's certainly important to us.
Yeah. And one of the questions following on from that, one of the questions that came in was about Ofsted's take on the 3-year Key Stage 4, if you like, and what would you say to that?
Well, that again, that is it's a hot topic, and in many ways, it's down to how leaders describe their curriculum. I think what Ofsted were trying to say is, in schools that had low standards, they often said they wanted to start Key Stage 4 early to give them more time to get to grips with the qualification and to cover the content. And I think Ofsted was saying that doesn't make sense, really. If you feel the children are starting behind, then surely they need more time in Key Stage 3 to develop those foundation skills in order to access the curriculum. So I can understand the debate. Yeah. Certainly from our perspective, we believe in diversity. We believe that for some subjects, you would not start an assessed course early, because it would disadvantage the child. So if you take GCSE English, for example, if you were going to submit a piece of writing that would form part of your ultimate GCSE assessment, it makes no sense to do that at the age of 13. You're being assessed against 16-year-olds. So I understand the point. However, I do also appreciate that in some pathways, starting in whatever that looks like, starting earlier does allow greater depth. It allows more experience for those pupils and a richness to the curriculum that often are rushed through Key Stage 4 that, let's be clear, is often only 4.5 terms by the time you take the exam period out. So I think it's people trying to find the middle ground of breadth and depth. And I don't think there is a one-size answer for that. I think it's dependent on a number of factors.
Okay, right. Thank you. I know that is a contentious. I know that's a question that's out there.
Can I just comment on something on that, just to add to what Tom said? So with regards to the vocational qualifications, I'm sure you guys at OCR have seen over recent years an increased number of students nationally taking these qualifications.
Absolutely, we have.
And I think one of the things we've been talking about nationally is that we're looking for parity between the GCSEs and the vocational qualifications. And when we're talking about the Ofsted framework, I think it's really important that we really stress that our students are being successful on the vocational qualifications because as an academy trust, we've invested in the qualification, we've upskilled our staff, we've looked at external support from the exam boards, and we've looked at qualifications which our students can access, which they enjoy and which they can be successful in. So therefore, by that very nature, some of our vocational qualifications have a slightly larger cohort size, but that doesn't mean in any way, shape or form they are easier qualifications. It just fits the nature and the learning pathway of our students. And I think that's something that in the vocational framework of the landscape, we should all be really, really clear on and really push that message.
I think that's a really important point Jamie makes, because we have some academies that have embraced some of these courses because, as Jamie said, the pupils enjoy the courses, they're successful in them, and in developing as many opportunities for pupils as possible, more and more pupils are choosing these courses. And then occasionally on inspection, an inspector might ask whether, is this gaming? Because you have 200 pupils following the sports science pathway. Well, my response is I was never accused of gaming when I entered all the pupils for GCSE maths. And if we're taking approved qualifications that it's been agreed by all parties that these qualifications have a place in the curriculum, have benefits to preparing pupils for their next stage in life, surely it doesn't matter in one centre whether 10 or 100 pupils are entered. If it's good for one, it's good for anyone. And I think there's a lot of debate in the system where schools are justifying decisions they are making, and one would argue there's no such thing as gaming, because these qualifications have gone through a rigorous process.
Yes,
and I don't think centres should be, and I certainly don't feel they are necessarily, if they can explain why this qualification is important to their curriculum and that they've invested in the support, the quality of teaching, and the other experiences that Jamie describes. How can that possibly be gaming? It's not.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I agree. For us as an exam board to submit a vocational qualification to the DFE and Ofqual, it goes through a rigorous and robust process to get onto that performance tables. So yes, you're absolutely right. Which brings us on to, and I think you touched on it a bit there in your answers, which is the EBAC, Progress 8, Attainment 8. The EBAC sits there at the centre. And how hard is it to get, and Jamie, from your point of view as senior vocational, how hard is it to get students to take courses that are not traditional GCSE? Is there an understanding from parents about that? How?
So language is really, really important, Toby. And as an Academy Trust, we've obviously heavily invested in vocational qualifications. So if the staff, the senior leaders and the children can see the value of the qualifications, then actually communicating that message to the parents isn't that difficult. And ultimately, parents want what's right for their child. So the effective dialogue between the academy and the parents, ultimately, we all want the same thing, don't we? We all want our children to be successful. And what I'd like to think in GAT and what happens is that our parents trust us to make the right judgment calls for their students. There's no way about it, Toby, that if there is a student that is going to be more successful on a GCSE qualification, then that student will access that qualification.
Yeah.
But we're not going to put students on GCSE qualifications if we ultimately think that they won't be as successful. We've got to look at the individual student, as Tom's alluded to earlier, and we tailor the needs of the curriculum to that student so they ultimately can be successful academically.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting at GAT over the last couple of years is that we've managed to find the blend between strong academic, if you like, EBAC curriculum with an employability pathway that enables pupils to follow our vocational option. And that's been where we've seen the greatest success for pupils, because they have the blend. So they do speak a language, they do study a humanity, and they are also potentially following the OCR sports pathway, or they've picked up one of the business studies, the iMedia, or the health and social care. It's not one or the other. Now, as a senior leader in academy that has to put together these curriculum models and then deliver them through some really complex timetabling, it can be a challenge, and it might be easier to put a vocational course in contrast to a GCSE course to make the sort of implementation of the timetable, the scheduling easier. But I think with a bit of effort, we found our leaders in academies have been really quite effective at keeping as many of these options open as possible. And we've seen an increase in the pupils that have all of the EBAC and an OCR national course, which we believe is in the benefit of the pupil, because they're exposed to all those different types of learning. And again, it's keeping options open for 16, then 18 and beyond. I certainly look back at my own experience in Scotland. I studied a blend of what we called standard grades, equivalent to GCSEs, but I also had a ScotVic module, which would have been the equivalent to perhaps a Cambridge National. I studied accounting and sport and things alongside the histories, the geography, sciences. And I certainly felt that was a strong feature of my own educational experience, and something which perhaps have encouraged in our trust, trying not to typecast pupils so early into particular pathways. The qualifications have evolved, and there's huge similarities in terms of content, and we believe there's huge similarities in terms of the level of difficulty and challenge. But we feel the teaching style and the assessment style varies to different types of learners, and that's often where we sometimes advise pupils to change, from their initial option.
But go on, Jamie, you're going to...
I was just going to add to that. So I think with the vocational suite of qualifications, there's real synergy between vocational qualifications and key skills of careers and employability. And ultimately, when we're working with employers, they're asking us for students that have got those softer skills. They're asking us for students that can be resilient, can meet deadlines, that have got empathy, that can show leadership. And those are skills that are related to the vocational suite of qualifications. We're actually quite unique at GAT because we've got within our central team, we've got 2 people that are fully designated to be careers and employability senior advisors. Wow. So if you were going to one of our GAT academies, even at one of the primary academies, they would be an understanding of the Gatsby benchmarks. And we're also we're challenging our academies to provide meaningful experiences for all of our students within the world of work, which again lend itself to the vocational suite of qualifications. And just on that as well, we look at career mark. So a number of our academies have got career mark, which is obviously the designated gold seal of approval around careers and employability. But Tom makes a really good point. The vocational qualifications offer that experience of life, which which our students can relate to. And many of our students are coming from family backgrounds where one of their parents or both their parents has got some form of career in one of the vocational suite of qualifications, which obviously helps that process.
So, absolutely. And in fact, and I think you've answered this partly, is one of the questions that came in was, do you have restrictions in the academy of subjects that students can't take? And I think you've answered that in saying it's every individual student has their strengths and their weaknesses, and your role is to guide them in making the right choices. But of course, some of your restrictions, as you pointed out, are on timetabling and what you can genuinely offer in academies. I mean, how do you deal with? I mean, there must be some requests that you can't offer.
Your point's quite poignant, Toby, actually, because we've recently looked at this. So we have started to look at the vocational suite of qualifications, and we've started to look at entry-level criteria to an extent, because obviously, if you're going to undertake a music qualification, you need some sort of skill or ability with music or some experience of it. So that's something that we have started to look at. But I think ultimately, when we talk about we're looking at a qualification for every single student, we're obviously being really realistic within the suite of qualifications we can physically offer. Because at the back of our mind is the size of the class, the teachers available. And I think that's one of the key points that I would also bring to mention is within some of the vocational qualifications, we haven't got specialist teachers delivering those qualifications because they don't lend themselves to a what you would call a recognised specialist teacher. And that's where OCR have been really, really helpful, because the specialist support that they've offered to upskill our non-specialist teachers, and I use that term very openly, our non-specialist teachers has been really, really helpful. And you've got systems like Exam Builder, and then the seminars, the grab a grade seminars, all of those sorts of things that you offer make it much easier for us to help to redevelop our teachers and help them on their CPD journey. And I think that's something that's really, really beneficial.
Yeah,
I think in that respect also, Toby, one of the challenges has been for us to keep pace with the pupil trends in terms of the qualifications they choose and reacting to the success that many of them are having in Key Stage 4 with appropriate bridge into Key Stage 5. So we found that the big challenge for us is to sustain the quality of offer that we absolutely have in Key Stage 4 into Key Stage 5, and that can often be determined by pupil numbers and therefore what courses we can run in Key Stage 5. But also we're realistic that if pupils are following a vocational pathway into Key Stage 5, then there may be other providers that will provide a better experience than we might in a traditional school environment. So most of our academies have very good relationships with local FE providers that may be providing an even greater link to the workplace, or even greater links to employment and apprenticeship thereafter. So we're realistic that we don't have a monopoly on the destinations of these pupils, and we see a success when our pupils transition obviously into Key Stage 5 with us, but we also celebrate their progression to other providers because they found an interest that they maybe found with us, and they're going to continue that in another environment. And it's quite rewarding, particularly for the subject teachers that have ignited that excitement in a passion. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fascinating keeping pace with these developments from a curriculum planning perspective.
And if I can just pick up on that, so we all know at the moment we're all working from home, children coming in, we're in a pandemic, and questions that we're being asked are, will we see more pupils choose health and social care and science-based qualifications because of the vaccine, the scientists, the NHS, everything we've seen over the past year? How influential do we think that's going to be? And some great questions to ask.
I think it's going to be hugely influential, and I think one of the biggest things we can do for our students is put the positive slant on the pandemic. So I think what the pandemic has displayed is that most jobs can now be done to some extent remotely. If you're talking about school improvement, school development, we still need to be in there in the academies. But when you're talking about remote learning, what we're saying to our students, particularly where I'm based in Skegness, is okay, you might be on the east coast of England, but actually remote work, remote employment now means that you are able to access those jobs in London, in some of the inner cities. And
amazing.
I think that's a really positive thing. Going back to the health and social care, Toby, I think one of the biggest things for us, which we're really trying to do, is make some of these qualifications more accessible for gender. So if you were to look at your statistics for health and social care, you would predominantly, I think it's about 95% for a girl-orientated course. And we're trying to break down those stereotypes all of the time and make these qualifications more accessible to boys and girls. Very similar with the child development course.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just going back to, before Tom chips in, just going back to something that you were just talking about there with Key Stage 5, because I know some sport questions came in our last meeting. We currently offer the triple sport, the level 3 triple sport. And if you've got any PE people that are listening in today, it's a fantastic course. What we've done across GAT is we've got our really keen sports people in at Key Stage 5, but also they're ambassadors. They're supporting our PE lessons. They're running our after school clubs. They're working in the primary sector, and then they're going off to recognised high profile universities to follow sports development, physiotherapy, PE teachers. And if there's anyone listening today who would like some information about how we do that, I'd be more than happy to meet up with them on that.
With you, that's fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we are getting close towards the end of the questions, so we'll drill down into the Cambridge Nationals a bit more. So how many teaching periods a week on average do you set aside for these Cambridge Nationals? And is it the same as the number of teaching you'd have for GCSE?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question because as a trust, we've grappled with this idea as to whether all of our academies follow a similar curriculum pathway, because that's not really what we're trying to achieve here. We talk about diversity as opposed to autonomy, as in our academies are devising a curriculum that's bespoke to their pupils and their context. Clearly, as a trust, we've used evidence to promote certain models and certain approaches, but ultimately the curriculum decisions are made by that academy that are dependent on their context, the pupils that they serve, the logistics around their capacity to deliver, whether that's teaching capacity or whether in some of the practical subjects it's around equipment and access to specialist teaching areas. But generally, the qualifications will have the same amount of teaching time as any GCSE. They certainly won't have any less.
No.
And again, I think in the old days of some of the vocational courses, schools might be teaching something in an hour a week, expecting pupils to succeed in it and for it to be meaningful. We are absolutely dead against that. And if pupils are going to do something and be accredited for it, they need to have had at least as much time as they would have done in an equivalent GCSE course. The beauty, of course, and I said this at last time we spoke on this, was that with some of the vocational courses, there's an opportunity to extend what the guided learning hours might actually constitute. Jamie made a great example there of the Key Stage 5 sport provision, where we've got pupils or students, as we call them in Key Stage 5, who are enhancing their taught curriculum time with work experience, supporting the development of their learning in the school environment, running clubs, after school events, all of which constitutes towards some of the assignments or the assessments that they take. So in many ways, there is more time to invest in the vocational pathways, but it's time well invested when it allows pupils to meet so many of their targeted outcomes.
Brilliant. Jamie, any?
Yeah, I think we're talking about parity, aren't we? So
Yeah.
the hours that we give to the vocational qualifications are in line with the hours that we give to other qualifications in the GCSE spectrum. And I think Tom makes a really, really good point. It's the extended curriculum almost from these vocational qualifications that we actually give additional time to. And for anyone listening out there, for your open element strategy, you need to give these qualifications the right amount of time in order to get the appropriate outcomes that you want for your students. It's a bit of a no-brainer, really, for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Brilliant. There is no second class of vocational qualifications. No. They are as robust as general qualifications, and they sit equally. And what is right for one student, as you said, is maybe not right for another, but it's up to that individual student. Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting towards the very end. I think this is kind of the last question. I mean, we've covered so much today. I mean, this has been absolutely fantastic. And probably, as we know, we've got the new Cambridge Nationals being launched in September 2022 for first teaching, for the first assessment to be in 2024. And of course, that will entail running two specifications, the current Cambridge Nationals and the new Cambridge Nationals, alongside as you get to that year 11 group to finish, and you've got the year, well, you'll have the year 10 and 11 and then the year 9s looking at that. So how on earth do you manage that?
Do you want me to take this one first, Tom?
Yes, yeah.
So the first thing to say is that on the new redeveloped OCR qualifications, the actual specifications are quite nice. The new ones compared to the old ones, they're very similar. So I think the first thing that I would say is that we need to be aware that year 10 and 11 currently and year 9 are on the old specification, but they will still be sat in performance tables. So we've got one eye on those, but we've also got one eye on the developments moving forwards. And I would encourage anybody listening to access the OCR materials and the guidance and the support that you guys offer. With regards to the specification, I think the most important thing, Toby, is going to be around the terminal exam. So we've had some sort of in-depth conversations with colleagues, and we intend to run what we're going to do, if I just talk you through it. So from year 10 through to 11, we're going to run the 20% part of the qualification first. So give our year 10s the opportunity to look at that, followed by the mandatory 40% part. Hopefully have all of that banked, which will allow us from year 11 to have a really good stab at the 40% terminal exam. So we've completely flipped our delivery from the old days where we would do the exam in the January of the May of year 10 and the January of year 11. Yeah. And I think that's going to be really, really key for people. The other thing to factor in is that students in the past were able to obviously not perform as well in the exam and then have the second attempt, and it's how we manage that expectation with our students. So what we're looking to do is knowledge retrieval within our delivery. So if you're if you're aware of the exam element, most of the exams in the OCR are specific content around one area. They're not overarching across the full qualification. So we're going to link our knowledge retrieval into each single individual lesson, whether the exam is part of that lesson or not. And just to make that sound a bit simpler, if you're doing sport and you're doing nutrition, well, nutrition isn't in the exam, but we will still link some of the exam content into that nutrition unit. And we think that that will give our students a much better opportunity to perform well in the exam.
Yeah, I think my point in working with colleagues in facing these sorts of issues is that we shouldn't necessarily sort of burden the pupils with this, because those pupils, they don't know that pupils in the year above are doing something different. So it's not different to them. And you know, I think that's really important. And also it's unsettling for pupils if they believe in any way they're the guinea pigs whilst everyone finds their way. And that's been the risk with the introduction of new qualifications all along. So at GAT, we spend our time investing heavily in the staff development, so that being able to manage the two different courses is considered in terms of workload, support, materials, resources, and therefore we've had a year running to preparing for that eventuality. But in the world of a busy secondary school, it wouldn't be unusual for teachers, in this example perhaps PE, to be teaching multiple specs and multiple
GCSE, A-level, nationals, technicals.
So there is a workload implication for the teachers involved, but it might be not unusual, and certainly within the resilience of a good department supported by good leaders in school that have given people the time and the resources to prepare. So I think that's something that we would know, and certainly at GAT, colleagues have been working together for some time preparing for this, and we're used to it, and therefore we don't anticipate any initial challenges in running those two programs simultaneously.
Yeah, one of the other things we looked at, Toby, around the new specs is the transition period. So we maybe will say in a department of 4, we might have 2 of the members of staff delivering on the old spec, then two members of staff deliver on the new spec, and then the old spec people then move across to the new spec. That's one of the things that we've looked at, but that's obviously dependent on the size of your department, isn't it? And
absolutely.
Applications. You know, if you've got a health and social care, you've probably got one teacher delivering 2 specific
business, perhaps.
The other thing that we're really keen to do is not pigeonhole staff. So we try not to have an A-level specialist, although you do need one. We try not to have a GCSE specialist. We try to get everybody feeling comfortable to deliver qualifications across the suite, which we found is really beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, from a teaching and learning perspective, teachers that have had the experience of delivering the full range of qualifications certainly we find have developed the very best practice of each, and that makes a very strong teacher. You know, some of the assessment practice and the diagnostic feedback that is part of the Cambridge National courses, when teachers grasp that as a pedagogical tool, it has positive impact on all classes they teach. So we certainly encourage teachers to have some experience across the diverse range of quals, so that it has that impact on their approach to teaching and assessment.
Sorry. One of the things you asked us earlier was what we've learned from the pandemic. And I think what we've learned from the pandemic is there is a new respect for teachers. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, parents have been at home trying to homeschool. And one of the things which Tom is really keen on, and as the Chief Education Officer, is we look at outcomes, but also we look at reducing teacher workload. And I think if we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's that the discussion around teacher workload needs to continue, because we need to support our teachers in what has been a really challenging time and what will continue to be a challenging time moving forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I certainly have a newfound respect for teachers. And one of the other things, coming off the back of your point, Tom, of course, OCR needs assessors and moderators and examiners each year. And what we've found is that those teachers that come on board and start to assess get a much deeper knowledge of the qualification that they're able to pass on to their pupils, and it gives them they get to see the whole country's responses to that one bit that they're marking or they're moderating on. And it really does, we've found, I mean, I don't know about you, but we've found it really adds to those teachers' experiences.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I was an examiner myself when I was teaching, and it's an absolutely invaluable insight. And I know Jamie encourages his team to get that experience working with the exam board, because it does deepen your knowledge of the subject and the assessment.
Yeah, it's something, Toby, that we actively encourage at GAT, and it's something that we try and work with all the exam boards, because the reality is that we often do standardisation and moderation across our trust to ensure that our grades are where we need them to be. So if I've got a moderator in one of the academies, then obviously they can share their knowledge and understanding with the other academies, and that's one of the ways we've looked to improve performance. But I think it's certainly something that we would recommend, and like you say, it gives you that deep-seated understanding of the qualifications, and actually as well for people's professional development. You know, we need to be aware that yes, you do work for our Academy Trust, but actually there are other opportunities out there, and you know, as Academy Trust, it's quite a proud thing. It's quite an accolade for us to have moderators and people that are respected by the exam boards. I think it's a really good thing and something that I would strongly recommend.
Fantastic. Right, before we draw this to a close then, is there any last things you'd like to say about the Cambridge Nationals or Greenwood Academies Trust to our audience today? Because I've asked you an awful lot of questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first. Only that I think the Cambridge National qualifications are really good qualifications that meet the needs of the students and that offer students a valuable insight into the world of work, but also they offer that pathway into level 3. And I'd be more than happy, or we'd be more than happy at GAT to work with anybody who wanted to collaborate or ask questions, but also I'd say there's things that we'd like to learn. So if there's anyone out there that's doing something different, I'd be really keen to engage with you guys. So that's it from my perspective. Yeah,
I mean, from my perspective, I've always valued the range of outcomes that pupils following these pathways come out with. So, you know, I talk a lot about the positive impact on pupils' attendance, the positive impact on their behaviour, well-being. Jamie's talked about leadership attributes. We see pupils blossom on these courses, and the impact isn't just in a Key Stage 4 outcome. It's about some young people finding their place in the world, finding an interest, finding a career that they never knew existed. And so certainly from my perspective, we value those outcomes, greatly. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for answering those questions today. That was absolutely fantastic. Of course, if you want to find out more, the OCR website has all the information about the new redeveloped Cambridge Nationals. So go on there. There's the information for CPD and Exam Builder, and that's all available on the OCR website. And we are updating that all the time as we produce more resources and get more information. So it just remains for me to say, Tom Campbell and Jamie Kilner, you've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for sparing the time to come on and answer all those questions. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks, Toby.
Thanks, Toby.